just another angry homeowner. Run it, Nelling, you started.
I am the storm you started.
The first sound I heard wasn't the birds or the wind. It was a chainsaw. Then came the crack of splintering wood, followed by laughter. By the time I turned the corner into my own backyard, the fence that marked the last thing my wife ever helped me build was already half gone. A woman in crimson heels stood by the open gate, clipboard in hand, sunglasses glinting like blades. "Stop right there," I called out. Patricia Langford didn't flinch. She was the kind of woman who had already decided what the law meant before anyone else could speak. The board chair smiled thinly, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "We sent 3 notices. You failed to respond. This structure violated height regulations." The hum of the chainsaw rose again. My pulse kept pace with it. I stepped closer. "I designed that fence myself. It's within code. You don't have a demolition permit." Her lips twitched, almost amused. "Our bylaws supersede your interpretation of code, Mr. Hayes." That was when I saw the initials, LH, burned into one of the fallen planks. My wife's mark. My throat tightened. Patricia gestured for the workers to continue. "Tear it down, all of it." I held her gaze, calm but sharp. "I helped draft the state's municipal boundary laws. You might want to double-check your authority before touching another board." For a second, the clipboard queen froze. Then she smiled again, colder this time. "If you want to dispute it, file an appeal. But I'd hurry. Sunset hearings close at 5. If you've ever stood there helpless as someone destroyed something sacred, stay with me. Hit subscribe because this isn't just about wood and nails. This is about every fight that starts with arrogance and ends with justice." I walked past her, running my fingers along the jagged posts. Each cut edge still smelled like cedar. I'd spent weeks sealing that fence after my wife's chemo ended, her laughter echoing across this same yard. We'd planned to plant ivy along the inside, something living to climb what held us. Now, what held us was gone. "Mrs. Langford," I said quietly, "you made a mistake." The enforcer in crimson tilted her head, that same polite defiance in every movement. "Mistake? No. Correction." Behind her, a young landscaper hesitated, eyes flicking between us. I caught the hesitation, the flicker of doubt. That was Evelyn Morales, the new hire from the design committee. She looked like she wanted to say something, but couldn't. I filed that look away. The officer of rules began photographing the wreckage, narrating each image for her record. "Unapproved structure, removed per Article 7. Her voice was crisp, controlled, like she'd done this 100 times. My voice stayed level, but every word came out edged. "You do know property line variance requires dual signatures, one from the city, one from the owner. You didn't get either." She shrugged. "Boundaries are interpretive." That sentence was the spark. I took a step forward, lowering my tone. "You just trespassed, Patricia, on public record." Her expression didn't change, but her hand tightened around the clipboard. She knew exactly what that meant. The workers stopped moving. The air went heavy. Somewhere a crow cawed, like it knew a storm had just started. I looked at what was left of the fence, angled posts jutting like ribs from the earth. It wasn't just lumber. It was proof of everything she thought she could erase with authority. "I built that fence for someone I loved," I said. "You'll regret touching it." She started to answer, but I'd already turned away. Inside, the silence felt louder than the chainsaw ever did. I sat at the kitchen table, where the blueprint still lay rolled up, a coffee ring staining the corner. My wife's handwriting looped in the margin, strong enough to last forever. Forever had lasted 5 years. I stared out the window at the empty boundary and made a quiet decision. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one they couldn't control, and this time I wouldn't build a fence. I'd build something they could never tear down. "Where are you watching from?" By morning, the whole neighborhood had heard about it. Silver Creek's gossip chain ran faster than any emergency alert system, and Patricia Langford knew exactly how to use it. The board chair didn't just enforce the rules, she weaponized perception. Every HOA mailbox, group chat, and bulletin carried her version of what had happened. Unauthorized fence, non-compliant structure, voluntary removal. Voluntary. The word stung. When I stepped outside, I saw her again. Heels clicking against the cobblestone walkway, as if she owned the rhythm of the street. The enforcer in crimson waved to a pair of neighbors trimming their hedges. They smiled back, nervous, pretending they didn't see me. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," she called. "Hope you slept well." I didn't answer. She thrived on control, and silence was the one thing she couldn't script. Across the yard, my neighbor Mark stood by his truck, avoiding eye contact. He was a good man, but fear made cowards of many. When the clipboard queen ruled a community, even friendship became a liability. Inside, my phone buzzed nonstop. Notifications, mentions, tags. Patricia's post had gone viral in our local HOA forum. A photo of my half-demolished fence with her caption beneath it. Some residents think personal taste outweighs community harmony. I stared at the screen, jaw tight. My wife's handwriting on those old blueprints flashed again in my mind, strong enough to last forever. Not anymore, I muttered. That afternoon, the officer of rules hosted an emergency clarification session at the clubhouse. I went. Not to speak, but to watch. The room was packed with homeowners, pretending not to take sides. On one end, Patricia stood behind the podium like a judge without a bench, her tone sweet but surgical. Our goal, she said, is to preserve uniform beauty. A few residents, though well-intentioned, sometimes forget that personal property doesn't mean personal exemption. Every phrase was rehearsed, every pause deliberate. When she saw me in the back, she smiled, a predator acknowledging prey. Of course, she continued, we welcome dialogue, as long as it's constructive. I waited until the meeting adjourned. Then I approached her. Patricia, I said evenly, her red lips curved. Daniel, still clinging to your fence? Still pretending it was legal to destroy it? She tilted her head. Oh, come now. We had to act. A fence that tall violates both visual guidelines and view easement ordinances. You should thank us. Property values are stable because of these measures. Stable? I laughed under my breath. You mean controlled. The clipboard queen's eyes glimmered. Controlled environments breed order, Mr. Hayes. Chaos is what you get when people think they can do whatever they please. I leaned closer. You just described yourself. For a split second, her mask slipped. Just a flicker. Then she gathered her papers, tapping them neatly against the podium. File your grievance properly, she said. You'll find we're very patient with procedural people. Outside, I caught a glimpse of Evelyn Morales lingering by the glass doors. She looked torn, like someone holding a truth too heavy to hide. When she saw me watching, she turned away quickly. I knew then the board wasn't united. Cracks existed, and cracks meant entry points. That evening, I drove past the cleared lot where my fence once stood. The sunset burned orange over the hill, washing the open space in gold. I could almost hear my wife's voice teasing, "You'd hate this, Danny. Too exposed." She was right, but exposure worked both ways. I parked, pulled out my camera, and began taking photos. Not of what was gone, but of what surrounded it. Distances, gradients, sightlines. Every house above mine shared the same view. One Patricia had just protected. The scenic easement wasn't about beauty. It was about privilege. And when I mapped it, the pattern was unmistakable. The properties of her allies all benefited from my fence being gone. By midnight, I'd found the line, the legal one. The city's boundary map proved my fence sat entirely on my parcel. They had trespassed. I smiled for the first time in days. All right, Patricia, I whispered. Let's play your game, but I write the rules now. Outside, the night air smelled like cedar and rain, like memory waiting for revenge. The next morning, I was standing at the edge of the torn-up yard when Evelyn Morales finally crossed the street. She looked both ways like she was sneaking into enemy territory. The conflicted witness had that restless energy people get when their conscience is louder than their fear. She stopped a few feet away, clutching a folder to her chest. Mr. Hayes, she said softly, you didn't hear this from me. Her voice shook. I could see she'd rehearsed this moment a dozen times in her head. What is it? I asked. She glanced toward the end of the street, where Patricia Langford's crimson sedan gleamed in the driveway like a threat dressed in luxury. The board chair ordered your fence removal personally, Evelyn whispered. It wasn't a committee vote. She told us to log it as unanimous consent. So there it was, the first fracture. The clipboard queen had always hidden behind procedure, wielding bylaws like weapons. But this time, she'd gone rogue. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Evelyn exhaled. Because I joined to help improve the neighborhood, not to watch her humiliate people. She said... Evelyn hesitated. She said your property spoiled the hill view for the premium homes. I looked past her shoulder toward the ridge, where Patricia's house sat higher than the rest, an architectural sermon on superiority. Before I could respond, the enforcer in crimson herself appeared on the sidewalk, heels sharp against the concrete. Her smile was the kind that asked a question and issued a warning at the same time. Good morning, Evelyn, she said smoothly. I didn't realize we had a subcommittee meeting. Evelyn stiffened, eyes darting toward me in apology. Patricia's gaze shifted to me. Still brooding over landscaping, Daniel? Still calling destruction maintenance, Patricia? I shot back. The tyrant in heels tilted her head, amusement flickering. "It's amazing what people get emotional about. You'd think I raised a cathedral. You tore down something that mattered." "To you," she replied, voice steady. "Not to the community." The board chair turned to Evelyn. "Ms. Morales, please remember our confidentiality policy. No individual discussions about board actions without my written consent." Evelyn's throat moved like she wanted to answer, but couldn't. Patricia lingered another moment, then pivoted on her heel and strode off, her perfume trailing like authority. When she disappeared around the corner, Evelyn finally spoke again. "She records every board call, keeps a private drive. If you could prove she's been falsifying votes, that's enough," she said quickly, glancing at the houses. "I shouldn't have said that. But she had, and it was more than enough." That night, I pulled up the HOA charter. Every decision required a minimum of 5 board signatures. If Patricia had filed unanimous consent without the quorum, it wasn't just misconduct, it was fraud. Still, I needed proof, and proof required proximity. 2 days later, I volunteered for the Neighborhood Improvement Survey. That's what Patricia called it when she wanted to appear democratic. It was really just a data grab, a way to justify her control under the banner of transparency. When I arrived at the community hall, Patricia was already there, adjusting her red blazer in the mirrored glass. "Mr. Hayes," she said, feigning warmth. "Didn't expect to see you volunteering. Redemption arc?" I smiled thinly. "Just thought I'd study governance from the master herself." She laughed, but her eyes stayed sharp. As the meeting began, she moved through the room like a choreographed storm, praising loyalists, dismissing dissenters with charm that bordered on cruelty. Evelyn took minutes at the far table, her hands trembling every time Patricia's voice rose. When the officer of rules announced, "All participants agree on the view easement policy revision," I watched Evelyn's pen hover midair. Patricia didn't wait for anyone to respond. She simply nodded at the recorder. "Unanimous," she said. The same word Evelyn had warned me about. That single word turned the noise in my head into resolve. I leaned toward Evelyn after the meeting. "Keep the drafts. Don't delete anything. Whatever happens next, you'll want proof that you tried to do the right thing." Her eyes filled with fear and something else, relief. "You're going after her, aren't you?" I nodded. "Not yet, but soon." Outside, as dusk stretched across the hill, Patricia stood by her car, typing into her phone. She looked up once, straight at me, and smiled. It wasn't arrogance anymore. It was recognition. She knew the battle had begun. And so did I. By the 4th day, Patricia Langford had turned Silver Creek into a stage, and she was the self-appointed star. The HOA newsletter arrived in every mailbox, her name stamped under a smiling header, "Preserving Community Integrity." Beneath it, an entire paragraph justified the demolition of my fence. She called it a collective beautification effort. The board chair was clever. She never lied outright. She twisted. She framed tyranny as maintenance and control as civic duty. I sat on my porch reading the letter until the words blurred. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "She's holding a closed session tonight. No public notice. You didn't hear it from me." Evelyn. I was already on my feet before the message ended. The enforcer in crimson always played by her own version of the rules, bending procedure until it bent others with it. If she was hosting a closed meeting without notice, it was a violation of state HOA transparency law, and I knew how to use that. At 7 p.m., the clubhouse lights were on, blinds half drawn. I parked down the street and walked up the hill, quiet as memory. Through the glass, I saw her, Patricia, standing at the head of the table, posture perfect, voice cutting through the room. "We can't allow dissent to fester," the clipboard queen said, flipping through her binder. "Once you let one homeowner challenge authority, it spreads like rot." Someone asked, "What about the complaint he filed?" She smiled. "It'll get lost in process. Let bureaucracy do what it does best. Nothing." Every word was ammunition. Then Evelyn spoke. "But shouldn't we address his boundary claim? He's technically correct about the lot line." The tyrant in heels didn't even look at her. "Technically," Patricia said, "means irrelevant. This isn't about dirt. It's about discipline." The way she said it, so casually, hit me harder than I expected. Discipline. That was her word for domination. I stepped back, phone in hand, recording. Minutes later, the meeting adjourned. Patricia exited first, heels striking the pavement in perfect rhythm. When she reached her car, I spoke. "You know, recording closed sessions violates your own bylaws," I said from the shadows. She didn't flinch. "And so does trespassing on private meetings, Mr. Hayes." Her tone was syrupy, dangerous. I moved closer. "Funny. I thought transparency was the foundation of leadership. The officer of rules met my eyes, something icy behind her, calm. Transparency is for those who've earned trust. You lost that when you built a wall against the community. Fence, I corrected, and I didn't build it against anyone. I built it for someone. For a brief moment, something flickered across her face. Confusion, maybe even guilt, but it vanished like light under clouds. "Good night, Daniel," she said finally, stepping into her car. "And do yourself a favor, stop recording battles you can't win." Her taillights disappeared down the slope, leaving silence in her wake. When I got home, I replayed the recording, clear audio, her words, her tone, her contempt, all preserved. I could already see the headline, "HOA Chair Admits to Illegal Session and Targeted Action." But I didn't post it yet, not yet. Power, misused, feeds on attention. And I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction, not until it would cost her everything. The next morning, I received a letter taped to my door. HOA letterhead, Patricia's signature. "Mr. Hayes, due to continued non-compliance and inappropriate conduct, your attendance at future community events is suspended pending review." Suspended. From my own neighborhood. I almost laughed. The tyrant in heels had escalated again, desperate to control the narrative. But she didn't realize something crucial. Her escalation was evidence. Every retaliatory act documented her guilt more than mine. Across the street, Evelyn stood at her window, curtain half drawn. She raised her phone, a silent gesture. I saw what she did. I nodded. The alliance was unspoken now. As the sun rose over Silver Creek, I felt something shift. Patricia had won every battle through fear, but she'd never faced someone who understood how systems fail from the inside. I wasn't building walls anymore. I was laying traps. By dawn, I'd memorized every clause in the Silver Creek HOA charter. My desk was a battlefield. Printouts, maps, and the recorded transcript of Patricia Langford's illegal meeting glowing on my laptop screen. The board chair thought she'd buried me under paperwork. She didn't realize I'd spent 15 years as a city planning consultant. Zoning codes, easements, setback rules, those were my weapons. That morning, I started digging into her paperwork trail. Patricia had always paraded her efficiency as proof of virtue, but power that clean on the surface always leaves fingerprints somewhere in the foundation. By noon, I found them. In the HOA's community improvement budget, an entry caught my eye. Emergency landscape restoration, 14 Ps $200. Dated the same week my fence was torn down. No vote, no invoices, just her signature. The clipboard queen hadn't just broken procedure, she'd funneled community funds into a private contractor. I traced the vendor name, Hillside Aesthetics LLC, to a one-room office owned by her cousin. That was my first thread of rope. I sent screenshots to Evelyn with a short message. "Keep this quiet for now." She replied within minutes. "Understood. She's calling a special session this Friday. No agenda shared yet." I knew what that meant. Damage control. Patricia would gather her loyalists to rewrite records before anyone could challenge her. But I had something she didn't. Proof and patience. Later that afternoon, I caught her inspecting the newly cleared area behind my home, clipboard in hand, phone pressed to her ear. The enforcer in crimson was in full performance mode. She waved to a landscaper and said, loudly enough for me to hear, "Make sure the replacement ground cover aligns with board-approved aesthetic standards. We can't risk another resident's creativity damaging our view corridor." I stepped out through my gate, camera in hand. "You know, Patricia," I said evenly, "you might want to double-check the budget line before calling it board-approved." Her hand froze midair. She turned slowly, her eyes narrowing. "Excuse me?" I walked closer, holding up my phone. "You signed off on a $14,000 landscaping expense with no minutes, no quorum, and no oversight." The tyrant in heels regained her composure instantly. "Procedural details, Mr. Hayes. The board has discretionary authority under emergency action clauses." "Emergency?" I scoffed. "You demolished a fence, not a dam." The officer of rules' jaw tightened. "You're overstepping again. If you keep interfering with operations, I'll have no choice but to refer you to compliance mediation." I smiled. "You'll have to get past city zoning first. I just filed a boundary violation report with photographic evidence." Her calm cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but I saw it. "You think you're clever?" she hissed. "You're not the first resident to overestimate their intelligence." "No," I said quietly, "but I'll be the last one you underestimate." She turned and stormed off, her heels stabbing at the ground like punctuation marks to her frustration. As she disappeared, Evelyn stepped out from behind her porch railing. "You actually did it," she whispered. "You filed it?" "Filed, time-stamped, and logged," I said. "And once the city reviews the footage from that night, they'll see her signature on the contractor report." Evelyn hesitated. "She'll come for you harder now. She's already drafting something, an unneighborly conduct complaint." I laughed softly. "Let her. Every letter she sends is a confession dressed in stationery." That night, I sat by the open window, watching the streetlights flicker across Patricia's house at the top of the hill. Her blinds were open. Through the glass, I could see her pacing, phone in hand, lips tight as she argued with someone unseen. Probably her cousin, probably about the missing funds. The board chair had built her empire on intimidation and bureaucratic theater, but now her own paperwork was turning against her. I closed my laptop, leaning back. The city's legal review would take time. That was fine. Time was her weakness, not mine. She needed control to survive. I just needed patience to win. Before turning in, I looked once more toward the hill. A single thought echoed like a promise. "You tore down my fence, Patricia, but you just built my case." 2 days later, Patricia Langford called an emergency, community-wide compliance forum. That was her code for public shaming. Every time she wanted to tighten her grip, she wrapped it in a smile and called it transparency. By the time I arrived at the clubhouse, every seat was filled. Neighbors whispered as I walked past. Some looked away. Others gave small nods of support. They were too afraid to make obvious. Evelyn sat near the back, eyes down, pen trembling over her notepad. The board chair stood at the podium in her signature crimson blazer. She didn't need a gavel. Her voice carried enough authority to silence a room. "Tonight," she began, "we address escalating violations undermining the aesthetic harmony of Silver Creek." Her tone was measured, almost gentle, but beneath it pulsed a need for control so absolute it bordered on mania. She flicked through a slideshow behind her. My property appeared on the screen, my backyard stripped bare after her demolition. "This," Patricia continued, "is what happens when individuals place personal expression above community standards." Gasps scattered through the room. I felt my pulse quicken. She'd turned the crime into propaganda. When she gestured toward me, the enforcer in crimson smiled like a lawyer about to close a case. "Mr. Hayes," she said sweetly, "you've been quite active. Lately, city filings, emails to contractors, even recordings. Would you care to explain your intentions to the board?" I rose slowly. The eyes in that room were heavy, half curious, half terrified. I faced them, not her. "My intention," I said, "was to protect my property and my daughter's safety. That fence existed because of an open ravine, until it was destroyed without notice or vote." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Patricia's eyes hardened. "Mr. Hayes," she interrupted, "the HOA had every right to—" I cut her off. Without a vote, without signatures, and without notifying the city zoning office, the clipboard queen's smile faltered for just a breath. "We acted under emergency discretion," she replied, her voice sharp now. I stepped closer to the aisle, voice calm. "Then perhaps you can explain why the $14th $200 expense was processed through your cousin's landscaping firm." The room erupted. Evelyn froze. Patricia's cheeks flushed beneath her foundation. For the first time since this began, the tyrant in heels looked cornered. "That's a baseless accusation," she snapped. "You've taken internal documents out of context." "I didn't take them," I said evenly. "They were public record until you tried to erase them." Gasps again. Someone whispered, "Is that true?" Another said, "She can't do that, can she?" The officer of rules straightened her blazer and forced a smile. "Mr. Hayes is mistaken, but out of respect for process, we'll adjourn briefly to verify." She left the podium before anyone could vote. As the room buzzed with speculation, Evelyn leaned over. "She'll bury that record before morning." "Not this time," I whispered back. "I've already sent the files to the city auditor's office." Evelyn's eyes widened. "You—" "Let her run," I said quietly. "Every step she takes now is toward the cliff." Minutes later, Patricia returned, face composed but eyes colder than before. "Unfortunately," she said, "due to procedural irregularities, this meeting will reconvene next week." No one believed her. The facade was cracking. That night, she sent me an official notice by email. "Cease interference with HOA operations or face legal consequences." The wording was textbook intimidation, but buried in the footer was her mistake. She'd attached the unedited financial ledger, the same one I'd referenced publicly, and there, in her own handwriting, was a note beside the expense. "Process ASAP, do not circulate." The clipboard queen had just signed her own undoing. I forwarded the email to the city investigator and leaned back, staring at the glow of the screen. Patricia Langford had built her empire on silence and fear, but fear only works when people don't know they have power. The neighbors who'd once avoided me were already whispering about what they had heard tonight. Seeds of doubt had been planted, and doubt, once rooted, doesn't die. It spreads. Outside, Patricia's porch light flicked on across the hill. I watched her silhouette pacing, phone pressed tight to her ear, probably spinning new lies, rallying her loyalists. But no matter how fast she moved now, she couldn't erase her own words or rewrite the law she'd weaponized. She'd drawn first blood when she tore down my fence. Now, I was taking her foundation apart, one regulation at a time. The night after the public fallout, Silver Creek felt like a neighborhood holding its breath. The HOA emails had gone quiet. No more community updates, no more smiling bulletins from Patricia Langford, just silence, the kind that hums right before a storm breaks. I'd expected retaliation, maybe even a lawsuit threat. What I didn't expect was the knock on my door at 9:42 p.m. It was Evelyn. She stood on my porch in a gray raincoat, face pale under the porch light. "Can I come in?" I nodded, stepping aside. She shut the door behind her and whispered, "She's panicking, Daniel. Patricia's trying to bury everything." Evelyn's voice trembled, but her eyes, those told a different story. Determined, cornered, ready. "What did she do?" I asked. "She called an emergency meeting without notice again," Evelyn said, glancing toward the window as if afraid the clipboard queen might materialize outside. "She told the board the financial records were compromised and ordered everyone to delete their copies. But I didn't." She reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. The enforcer in crimson had finally miscalculated. She'd underestimated the quiet one in her ranks. I took the drive, weighing it in my hand. "What's on it?" Evelyn's lips pressed into a line. "Everything. The unedited audit logs, contractor invoices." She signed off on 3 unauthorized transfers. Same cousin's company, different dates. She even labeled one as beautification contingency. I stared at her. "You know this makes you a whistleblower." "I know," she said, "and I also know she's been threatening to revoke my voting rights if I don't cooperate. She sent me a notice today, said she'd fine me for neglecting my front lawn." I almost laughed. Neglecting your lawn? That's her move. Start small, intimidate, escalate. Evelyn's composure broke then. "I was loyal, Daniel. I believed in her vision, but I watched her lie, twist every meeting, humiliate you in front of the community. And tonight, when she ordered us to destroy records, I realized I wasn't protecting the neighborhood anymore. I was protecting her." She wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. "I can't do that anymore." That moment, watching the conflicted witness finally cross the line, felt heavier than any confrontation with Patricia herself. "She's going to know it was you," I said quietly. "I don't care," Evelyn replied. "If she threatens me, I'll tell the city everything. I'll testify." The officer of rules wouldn't see that coming. Patricia had spent years bending regulations, but she'd built no loyalty, only fear, and fear fractures when truth enters the room. I backed up the files immediately, encrypting them across 2 drives and cloud storage. "This is enough to take her down," I said. "The city investigator will need corroboration, but this is the missing link." Evelyn nodded slowly, still gripping her coat. "She's not going to go quietly. You know that, right?" "Oh, I know," I said, glancing toward the window. Across the street, Patricia's house glowed like a watchtower. Porch light on, blinds drawn halfway. The tyrant in heels was always watching, always calculating. The next morning, the HOA website was down. The email list was gone. Patricia had gone full lockdown. I received a single curt message from the board secretary. "Effective immediately, Mr. Hayes. Your property is under review for non-compliance and unauthorized public disclosure of board materials." I almost smiled. That was her last weapon, bureaucratic bluster. But this time, the tables had turned. By noon, I'd submitted Evelyn's data and my recordings to the city attorney's office. I didn't need to post it online or rally the neighborhood yet. Truth doesn't need spectacle. It just needs daylight. That evening, Evelyn texted again. "She knows. She called me a traitor in front of the others." I replied, "Then she's scared." For the first time, Patricia Langford's perfect suburban empire wasn't just cracking. It was bleeding credibility. As night fell, thunder rolled over Silver Creek, echoing through the empty streets. And in that moment, I knew. The final act was coming. The walls she tore down had become the walls closing in. By sunrise, I knew the storm had officially broken. Patricia Langford wasn't hiding anymore. she was fighting back. At 7:15 a.m., I woke to find 3 official notices taped to my front gate, all signed by the board chair, Patricia L. The first accused me of defamation. The second, unauthorized disclosure of private community materials. The third claimed my 12-foot wall in progress violated view preservation ordinances. Every page reeked of desperation dressed as authority. I stepped outside with my coffee and read them slowly, word by word. The phrasing was textbook HOA intimidation, but sloppy. Each notice cited sections from bylaws that didn't even exist anymore. She was rushing. The clipboard queen was unraveling. By mid-morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. People whispered on sidewalks, glanced toward my house, then back toward Patricia's. The enforcer in crimson had ruled through fear for years, but the gossip now wasn't about her control. It was about her mistakes. Evelyn called around noon. Her voice was tight. She's planning an emergency board vote tonight. She wants to revoke your membership status. On what grounds? I asked. Unneighborly conduct and hostility toward governance, Evelyn read. She's rewriting the definitions as we speak. I almost laughed. Good. Let her. The more she edits those bylaws, the deeper she digs her own hole. I've already sent copies of every version to the city records office. There was silence, then a small exhale on her end. She's terrified, Daniel. She's not eating. She's been in that clubhouse since dawn, locked in with the treasurer. Then she's cornered, I said. Cornered people make mistakes. I spent the afternoon gathering my countermeasures. Every claim she'd filed against me, I'd documented. Every bylaw she'd twisted, I'd archived. And now, thanks to Evelyn's files, I had proof of financial manipulation. The plan wasn't revenge. It was exposure. I wasn't going to fight Patricia in the dark anymore. I was going to drag her empire into daylight. That evening, when the emergency board meeting began, I walked in through the front doors, not sneaking, not apologizing. The room went silent. Patricia stood at the front, immaculate as ever in her crimson blazer, hair pinned tight. But her eyes, those betrayed her. Behind the poise, she looked tired, cornered. Mr. Hayes, she said, forcing a smile, this meeting is for board members only. I'm aware, I replied, placing a sealed envelope on the podium. That's why I'm not here to speak. I'm here to deliver. The officer of rules frowned. Deliver what, exactly? Copies of your internal transfers, procurement discrepancies, and false citations filed under the HOA's name. You'll find them verified by timestamp and witness affidavit. A low murmur rolled through the room. Patricia's hand twitched as she reached for the envelope. This is harassment? No, I said calmly. This is accountability. The treasurer, a man who rarely spoke, looked up from his papers. Patricia, is this true? Her face froze, just for an instant. Then the tyrant in heels turned on him. Of course not. He fabricated this. He's been manipulating members for months. But her voice cracked. Everyone heard it. Evelyn stood near the doorway, clutching her folder like a lifeline. The records match, Patricia, she said softly. I verified them. 3 payments to Hillside Aesthetics, your cousin's company. The room went still. Patricia's composure shattered. You ungrateful coward, she hissed at Evelyn. After everything I've done. That's the problem, Evelyn said, her voice trembling but firm. Everything you've done. The enforcer in Crimson's control evaporated in that single moment. She looked around the room, searching for allies. None met her gaze. I leaned forward. You tried to take my home. You destroyed my property. You mocked my family. But the law doesn't bow to a clipboard. Her jaw clenched, but she said nothing. I turned to leave, pausing just long enough to say, the city investigator will be here by Friday. You might want to get your paperwork straight before then. As I walked out, the silence behind me was deafening, the kind that follows when power finally collapses under its own weight. That night, Patricia's house stayed dark. No porch light, no movement. The empire she built on intimidation had finally begun to rot from the inside. The morning after that disastrous meeting, the air in Silver Creek felt different, like static before lightning strikes. Patricia Langford had vanished from public view. Her car wasn't in the driveway, her porch light stayed off, and the HOA's social feed, usually brimming with cheerful propaganda, was silent. But silence doesn't mean surrender, not with her. By noon, I got my confirmation. The clipboard queen had filed a temporary restraining order against me, claiming I'd threatened board security. Classic misdirection. When power slips, she fabricates danger to make herself the victim. I walked out to check my mailbox. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered on the corner, murmuring. One of them, Mr. Denton, who'd always nodded politely but never spoken, approached me. Heard she's lawyering up, he said. But people are starting to ask questions, real ones. That was all I needed to hear. The officer of rules was losing her audience, her stage, her control, her fear, all collapsing faster than she could rebuild. And now that Evelyn had come forward, others were whispering too. It was no longer my fight, it was becoming our awakening. I spent the afternoon finalizing the evidence package, financial statements, video clips of her unauthorized demolition order, timestamps from HOA emails, all indexed and organized for the city investigator. My desk looked like a war table, each paper a weapon. Still, I knew Patricia wouldn't go down quietly. At 5:32 p.m., my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Cease your harassment of Mrs. Langford immediately, or face civil penalties for defamation and trespass. Bennett and Cole, Law Group. I stared at the screen and smiled. She'd finally lawyered up. That meant she was scared enough to spend money. Evelyn texted soon after. She's trying to intimidate me too. Sent a cease and desist. I replied, ignore it. They're smoke bombs, meant to blind us before the truth hits. Across the street, Patricia's blinds twitched. I could see her silhouette pacing, tight shoulders, phone in hand, movements sharp and erratic. The enforcer in crimson had always loved control, but nothing terrifies a tyrant more than realizing control was an illusion all along. By evening, I called a few neighbors, Denton, Maria, and even old Mrs. Fields, who'd once defended Patricia at every meeting. We gathered in my living room. The mood was cautious but electric. We've all got stories, Maria said. She fined me for hanging my wreath an inch too low. Said it ruined the symmetry of the street. Mrs. Fields sighed. She made me repaint my shutters 3 times because she didn't like the shade. I thought she was just dedicated. She's dedicated to herself, I said. And now the city's investigating. If we come forward collectively, she can't silence us one by one. Evelyn arrived midway through, clutching her laptop. I have one more thing, she said, opening it on the coffee table. An audio clip. She didn't know I was recording during that private call with the treasurer. She hit play. Patricia's voice crackled through the speakers, icy, deliberate. If the city calls, you tell them it was a clerical error. If he pushes further, we'll fine him until he breaks. People give up when they're exhausted. The room fell silent. Even Mrs. Fields, who'd defended her for years, whispered, that's not leadership. That's cruelty. The tyrant in heels had unknowingly signed her own confession. I looked at Evelyn. This seals it. Once the investigator hears that, she's finished. She nodded. Then let's end it properly. We drafted a joint statement, signed by 10 residents, documenting years of intimidation, false citations, and retaliatory fines. It wasn't vengeance. It was justice written in plain language. Before sending it off, I looked out the window again. Patricia's porch was still dark, but I could feel her presence, watching, waiting, calculating. Maybe she thought another legal trick could save her. Maybe she still believed she was untouchable. But this wasn't about bylaws anymore. It was about integrity, community, and the courage to face down someone who'd mistaken authority for ownership. As I hit send on the statement, I whispered to myself, your rules won't save you now, Patricia. Because in Silver Creek, her era of silence had ended, and the wall she tore down had become the one she couldn't climb back over. The investigation didn't just rattle Patricia Langford, it dismantled her carefully built illusion, piece by piece. But like any wounded predator, she wasn't going down quietly. By Tuesday morning, the HOA's official newsletter landed in every resident's inbox. The header read, Restoring Integrity in Silver Creek. I knew that voice immediately. Every word dripped with the polished poison only the clipboard queen could write. She called me a disruptive homeowner with a history of noncompliance. She called Evelyn an emotionally compromised former board member. And she called the investigation a politically motivated smear campaign designed to harm our community's reputation. I didn't even need to read the rest. It was her last desperate attempt to rewrite the story. But what Patricia didn't realize was that her words were now ammunition for me. At 9:04 a.m., the city investigator, a calm woman named Drayton, called. Mr. Hayes, we received the recording and the financial discrepancies. We're moving forward with an official audit. I'll be on site this afternoon. I nodded. You might want to bring extra folders. That day I stood in my front yard, sipping coffee, as unmarked sedans rolled into the neighborhood. Patricia was outside too, perfectly dressed in that crimson blazer, sunglasses on, pretending to garden. When the investigator stepped out, she froze. The enforcer in crimson wasn't used to people knocking on her door. I watched from across the street as Drayton handed her the audit notice. Patricia smiled tightly, said something performative like, of course, full transparency. then promptly locked herself inside the clubhouse with the treasurer. Evelyn texted me minutes later. "She's shredding papers," I replied. "Not fast enough." Inside, Patricia's empire was burning, quietly, bureaucratically, but burning nonetheless. By noon, the investigator was taking sworn statements. Residents lined up one by one outside the community hall. What had once been Patricia's private court had turned into her tribunal. Mrs. Fields was first. Her voice quivered, but she spoke. She fined me for a bird feeder, said it violated wildlife policy. I paid twice before I realized she just made that rule up. Then Maria stepped forward, clutching her folder. She told me my fence paint was an eyesore, but when her friend painted the same color, she called it charming rustic. Evelyn stood next, calm, composed, brave. She instructed me to delete audit records and call them draft errors. I didn't comply. The officer of rules was unraveling faster than her paperwork. Around 3 p.m., I saw Patricia step out of the clubhouse for air. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken. She spotted me across the street and walked over, slow, deliberate, heels clicking against the concrete like gunfire. "Happy now?" she said, voice trembling but sharp. "Not yet," I answered. Her eyes flashed. "You think you've won? You don't understand how this works. People forget. Investigations fade. I'll rebuild." "Maybe," I said, "but not here." She smirked, a reflex, like armor. "You can't erase me, Daniel. I am this community." "No," I said, stepping closer. "You were its parasite." For a second, the tyrant in heels dropped her mask. Her lips parted, her jaw quivered, and beneath all that polished power, I saw it. Fear, not anger, not pride, just fear of exposure. She turned and stormed back toward the clubhouse. An hour later, 2 investigators walked out carrying boxes, financial records, citation logs, and a hard drive labeled private board correspondence. Patricia followed behind, pretending calm, but her knuckles were white against her clipboard. The clipboard queen, stripped of her kingdom, looked smaller now, like a woman realizing her authority was paper thin all along. That night, the neighborhood group chat lit up. Screenshots of Patricia's audit notice spread like wildfire. Neighbors who'd once avoided confrontation started sharing their own stories, each one worse than the last. And for the first time since moving here, I didn't feel like an outcast. I felt part of a neighborhood again. A real one. As I sat on the porch watching the sun drop behind the newly built wall she'd once ordered torn down, my phone buzzed again, a message from Evelyn. "Tomorrow's the hearing. She's officially being suspended pending investigation." I smiled. "Tomorrow," I whispered. "The board chair finally meets the boardroom floor." The reckoning wasn't over, but Patricia Langford's reign was. The board hearing drew the biggest crowd Silver Creek had ever seen. Even people who'd moved away months ago came back just to witness it. By 6 p.m., the community hall was packed wall to wall, neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder, phones out, murmuring. At the front sat Patricia Langford, perfect posture, flawless makeup, crimson blazer pressed sharp enough to cut glass. She looked calm, but her fingers betrayed her, tapping the pen against her clipboard in the uneven rhythm. The enforcer in crimson was cornered, and for the first time, everyone could see it. I stood at the opposite end of the hall beside the city investigator, Drayton. To my right, Evelyn sat with a neat folder of exhibits. Every piece of evidence we'd collected, audio recordings, forged citations, fake expense reports, was now part of the public record. The meeting opened with formalities. The interim chair, Mr. Rivera, cleared his throat. Tonight's session will review allegations of misconduct against Mrs. Patricia Langford, former acting chair of the Silver Creek Homeowners Association. Patricia adjusted her blazer and smiled faintly. "Alleged misconduct," she corrected, her voice smooth but strained. "Let's not pretend I'm guilty before we begin." Her confidence hadn't faded. It had curdled. Rivera continued. "The floor recognizes Mr. Daniel Hayes, the homeowner who filed the initial complaint." Every head turned toward me. I stepped forward, steady. For years, Mrs. Langford ruled this neighborhood like it was her personal fiefdom. She fined families into silence. She rewrote bylaws to punish dissent. She even ordered my fence destroyed while I was out of state and billed me for the cleanup. Patricia's pen stopped tapping. I pulled a single sheet from my folder and held it up. "This is a purchase order she authorized. It was labeled community maintenance, but the contractor listed here is her cousin. Same address, same bank account." A low ripple of voices swept through the room. Patricia leaned forward, voice cracking just enough to reveal the truth beneath her facade. "That's absurd. I delegated those tasks. Standard. Procedure. You're twisting paperwork into conspiracy." Drayton, the investigator, spoke next. Actually, Mrs. Langford, the city reviewed the transactions. The payments bypassed HOA accounting software entirely. The checks were cashed directly. The clipboard queen froze. For a heartbeat, she didn't breathe. Then she tried to pivot. This is a misunderstanding. But Evelyn interrupted, rising to her feet. No, Patricia, it's not. The crowd fell silent. Evelyn's voice trembled, but her conviction held steady. I was there when you made that call. You said, and I quote, "Keep the invoices off the books. We'll call them donations later. You've lied to all of us." The tyrant in heels turned to her, eyes burning. You were supposed to stay loyal. I was loyal, Evelyn said softly. To the truth. Patricia's composure fractured. She slammed her pen down. You're all hypocrites. This neighborhood was falling apart before I took charge. I made it beautiful. I brought order. I met her glare. You brought fear. For a long second, we stared at each other across that fluorescent-lit room, the destroyer of fences, the sheriff of silence, and me, the man she'd tried to break. Rivera cleared his throat again. Mrs. Langford, the evidence presented is overwhelming. The motion before us is to suspend your privileges pending legal review and dissolve your financial authority. The crowd murmured again. Patricia's jaw tightened. You can't vote me out. I am the HOA. Not anymore, Rivera said. The vote took less than 2 minutes. Every hand in the room went up, except hers. When the result was read, Patricia didn't move. Her face was porcelain, her eyes, ice over boiling water. Slowly she stood. You think this is over? I built this place. You'll see what happens when I'm gone. She grabbed her clipboard, lifted her chin, and marched toward the exit. Each click of her heels echoed like a countdown to her own oblivion. As the door closed behind her, the crowd erupted. Not with cheers, but with the strange, stunned sound of collective relief. Drayton turned to me. You did good, Mr. Hayes. I shook my head. No, we did good. Evelyn smiled faintly. You think she'll really leave? I looked at the empty doorway where the enforcer in crimson had stood moments before. Maybe not yet, but her power did. Outside, the sun had already set, but for the first time in months, Silver Creek didn't feel suffocating. The air was clear. The silence was peace, not fear. And the clipboard queen, once the voice of authority, was now just another echo fading into the night. The morning after Patricia Langford's fall, Silver Creek woke up to something it hadn't felt in years. Quiet. Not the uneasy kind, but peace. The streets were calm, the bulletin board stood empty, and the emails from the HOA had stopped for the first time since I'd moved here. It felt unreal, like a town catching its breath after a long storm. Still, peace doesn't come without aftermath. The board chair's shadow lingered. Her crimson blazer no longer ruled the meetings, but the memory of her control still echoed through every porch and driveway. Evelyn stopped by around 10. You heard? She asked, setting 2 coffees on my porch table. The city froze the HOA's bank account. They found 3 years of unreported expenses. I nodded. She built her empire on paper and fear. Both burned fast once the truth hit sunlight. She smiled faintly. Drayton called. They're filing formal charges: embezzlement, falsification, and misuse of homeowner funds. For a moment, I didn't speak. I just stared out at my rebuilt fence, the same one Patricia had ordered torn down months ago. It wasn't just wood and paint anymore. It was defiance turned into structure, a line that said enough. But even as justice unfolded, I couldn't shake the image of her walking out of that hall. The clipboard queen stripped of her power, but not her arrogance. I knew her type. People like her don't vanish quietly. They wait, they scheme, they try to rebuild. By noon, my prediction came true. A post appeared in the local online forum. No name attached, but the writing was unmistakable. Leadership should be respected, not destroyed by gossip and mob mentality. Some people mistake vengeance for justice. The tyrant in heels had found her new weapon: sympathy. I showed Evelyn the post. She sighed. She's trying to play the victim now. She's trying to rewrite the ending, I said. But she doesn't own the story anymore. We do. That evening, the community gathered at the park for an emergency meeting. No podiums, no formality, no fear. Just people talking openly, like neighbors again. Rivera stood at the center and spoke first. We've all seen what happens when power isn't questioned. We're starting over. No more unilateral rules, no more intimidation. From now on, every decision requires a community vote. Applause broke out, not loud, but genuine. Evelyn leaned over and whispered, she would have hated this. She built fences, I said. We're building bridges. As the meeting ended, a breeze swept through the park, carrying the smell of fresh cut grass and spring air. The sense of relief was almost sacred. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her, Patricia Langford, standing by her car at the far end of the lot, sunglasses on, watching. The enforcer in crimson, reduced now to a spectator. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable, but I could see the calculation in her posture. I walked toward her slowly. "Couldn't stay away, huh?" She smirked, the faintest trace of her old confidence bleeding through. "Just curious. Wanted to see what you did with my neighborhood." "Correction," I said. "Our neighborhood." Her jaw tensed. "You really think this little rebellion will last? People crave order. When they realize they can't agree, they'll come running back, to someone who knows how to lead." "Maybe," I said, stepping closer. "But not to you. You taught us something you never intended. What control looks like when it rots from the inside." For the first time, her voice cracked. "You think you're better than me?" "No," I said quietly. "Just freer." She stared at me, then turned toward her car. "Enjoy your peace, Sheriff," she said. "It never lasts." She drove off without looking back. The sun hit the windshield, flashing red against the fading sky before she disappeared around the corner. Evelyn joined me on the sidewalk. "Think she's gone for good?" I exhaled slowly. "People like her never really leave, but that's fine. We've learned how to stop them." We stood there in silence as the streetlights flickered on. The sound of laughter drifted from the park, the sound of neighbors talking, kids playing, life moving forward. The fence gleamed under the amber light. It wasn't just a wall anymore. It was a monument to resilience, a reminder that no matter how many rules someone writes, they can't own the human spirit behind the homes they try to control. I turned to Evelyn. If you've ever faced someone like her, someone who thought they could take your peace and call it order, remember this: you can always rebuild, stronger, higher, freer. Then I looked at the camera, steady and certain. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Because this fight, it's far from over.